All right, so I want to first just learn a little bit more about your role, Mark, and what you do at AirWatch, and what are some of the big key things that you guys are focused on for 2015, and a little bit more about you.
Great, Stephanie. You've taken up my first 5 answers. I handle federal government solutions for AirWatch out of the Washington, D.C. market. So it's a really fascinating position to be in. I think in many ways the federal government is the leader in a lot of the new technology that comes into play. I was talking with Keith out in the audience, though, who attended one of our user group meetings. And the interesting thing is we can't talk about those often. Oftentimes we can't talk about those things. I will say we just finished the CESG, the CES government event, over the last 3 days or so. So I have to give a quick shout out to Gary Shapiro and Don Upson and the team that put that together. We had representation from members of Congress from the East and West Coast, Darrell Issa from California, Jim Moran from Virginia, the Virginia governor, Terry McAuliffe, and then we wrapped it up with a few sessions with Skunk Baxter. So it was really fascinating. Now, I just said Skunk Baxter, and I was looking at the audience to see if anybody was going to actually raise their hand and say, who's that? So does anybody know Skunk Baxter? Know of him, yeah. So the interesting thing is he is, or formerly was, the lead guitarist for Steely Dan and the Doobie Brothers, and is now a cybersecurity consultant to the federal government. So it's the real deal. He wasn't working with us as an entertainer. He was working with us as a peer. And it was really fascinating to have a group like that together. So we've had a lot of fun so far at CES, and I think there's a lot more to come. Now, I'm still talking. I know you want to grab the mic, just give me a kick or something because you asked a bunch of questions at once. So another thing is there was a lot of law enforcement represented. So at the highest levels of government are the usual agencies that you see that participated. And there's a lot going on in the cybercrime area, as you know, with the headlines today. So part of the buzzwords for that conference were that crime is a growth industry. And that's kind of a buzzword that everybody uses here for technology. And we're using technology in a number of ways to fight that cybercrime. So it was a pleasure to work with the folks that are doing that, and they're not only disrupting cybercrime, but they're prosecuting it. So let me pass the mic and we'll see where we go from there.
Well, it's interesting that you talked about that. I think from a consumer perspective, the industry is really becoming much more aware and much more concerned about security. So I would love to learn a little bit more about your products. And from a consumer perspective, what are some of the things as government staff, government users bring their own devices into the workplace? What are some of the things that you guys are doing from a product and service perspective to help? I know this probably goes across industry, but I would love to hear more of your perspective around that.
Sure, and that's another broad question. So we follow the guidelines of the agencies that we work with in the federal government to build security to their specifications. Oftentimes we'll bring partners in and suggest ideas, and there are a lot of biometrics. There's pretty much a biometric for everything. There's a fingerprint scan, an iris scan. You can now do a doorknob scan where if you grab the doorknob, it somehow can analyze your veins, and that's supposedly starting to be used by hotels that don't want to pass out keys. But we follow the guidelines that the government uses for us to build either FIPS certified encryption from the National Institute of Standards, or the Defense Information Systems Agency has what they call a STIG that allows them to build the technology and implement it to their specifications. So it's actually an implementation guide. And then there are other agencies that we're constantly working with that we're not supposed to talk about that are trying to move encryption to higher levels and authentication to higher levels. They want to use smart card authentication. They also want to use, if you're familiar with encryption and certificates, they want to use soft certificates instead of smart cards. And in many cases, it depends on the mission. So you can imagine the breadth of missions, especially in the military, from office workers to Special Ops Command folks. So it's a very, very broad question. And any individuals that want to talk about their specific use cases, we can go into a really deep dive as to what's appropriate for them.
Thank you. So another question I had is, it's been a little over a year since VMware acquired AirWatch. And I'd love to learn a little bit more about how you guys are leveraging those new relationships, the new organizational structure, and how that's really changed your forward-looking products and services portfolio for 2015.
Okay. Thanks, Stephanie. So I can address it from an AirWatch perspective, which is really interesting for us. We were here last year. We were an independent company. We would have our meetings in a room this size, and now we're part of VMware. VMware is the fastest growing software company in the history of the United States, from 0 to 5 billion in annual revenues. So now when we have our meetings in this room, they have theirs in the Moscone Center in San Francisco, and we are now part of that. So it's generally wonderful in that they were acquired, or at least 80% owned, by EMC. So that run of success was under that model. And what they're trying to do now, it looks like, is replicate that success. So they're allowing AirWatch to operate under our own brand, with our own management, our own Atlanta-based headquarters. And inside this large, successful software company, they're pouring resources into AirWatch. They gave us over 100 developers on the first week or first month that we were together. And their technology is, they're the leaders in virtualization. So from what I understand from where I sit and just listening to the grapevine, there were a lot of people interested in acquiring AirWatch and other MDM companies. And some of them were just not a real fit. But when you go into an organization like VMware, where the actual technologies have a lot of synergy, then you have a 1 + 1 = 3 type of scenario. So they're the leaders in virtualization. VMware has a division that does what they call end-user computing, or desktop virtualization. And they've added a lot of AirWatch technology into that. They're doing best of breed to take the AirWatch pieces, they're best of breed, and adding them to the desktop virtualization. And then they're taking the opposite and blending them together, so that some of the things that we do very well, like application management, distribution, and security in an AirWatch app store, are being built into the desktop end user virtualization. Content management, you're probably seeing a lot of sizzle from the content management vendors that are out in Silicon Valley. They're primarily consumer-based, so they've got a lot of visibility. AirWatch built a content management technology that is 100% enterprise. So VMware has embraced that and is building that in. What I know one of Stephanie's questions I can predict, is what's going to happen in the future. And so I see that technology is the ability to use any device, anytime, anywhere, switch devices seamlessly and effortlessly from the end user's perspective. Everybody in here has devices. I see a lot of people with them out and maybe even changing from one to another. So say you go from the laptop in the hotel room to the smartphone in the cab, and then the tablet on the flight. You do all of that seamlessly with no effort from the end user's perspective, and pick up right where you left off. I view that, as I discussed with Keith before the meeting, not not an if question, but a when question. And we see large forward-looking customers, or prospective customers, are looking at deploying that technology in 2015.
So as I mentioned earlier, the Internet of Things, we're inundated with the term. Sometimes I think we at Compass Intelligence almost get exhausted hearing it, but it is one of the fastest growing areas in terms of technology advancement, and a lot of activity from venture capital and just new product development and platform development. So I did read that VMware has joined the Industrial Internet Consortium, and so my question to you is, I'd love to learn a little bit more of your perspective around the Internet of Things and where you see that moving, especially from a federal government perspective. Do you believe that they're going to be slower adopters, or are they going to be much more advanced than what we think today.
Okay, remind me to comment on dumpsters and doorbells. So the Industrial Internet Consortium is a new standards body. So again, as all you IT professionals know, the importance of standards bodies in emerging technology. Being the largest enterprise mobility management vendor in the industry, which AirWatch is on its own, aside from VMware, more than twice the size of any competitor, allows us to take guidance from our very large, influential customer base of most of the global 2,000 commercial customers, as well as most of the very large government organizations. So that's why we're in it. That's why we've joined it. Again, in that formula of 1 + 1 = 3, is if we work together, allow those very large multinational firms to shape the development of the technology and to use the consortium to develop standards that meet everybody's needs, we all win. Everybody involved wins, as opposed to trying to cobble together disparate pieces and having some difficulty. Now, on use cases, it's really interesting to see the use cases range across the board. The Internet of Things is displayed quite a bit out on the CES floor. And so you're going to go into sensory overload if you haven't already been out there, and it is just mind-blowing. Every kind of robot and an automated vacuum cleaner and you name it is out there. As a matter of fact, one of the vendors' call sign or buzzword is the Internet of Everything. So back to the dumpsters and drones, just to give you an example of dumpsters and doorbells, very fundamental thing. It's one of these where you kind of smack yourself in the face and say, why didn't I think of that? So I was talking with someone that's doing an application, an IoT application for dumpsters that is just sensors inside the dumpster that indicates to the trash truck how empty the dumpster is or how full it is. And you just look at the logic of it and say it's wireless, it sends data, the data can go into an analytics program, the trash company can plan their routes, get the coverage better, the truck doesn't have to stop at every empty dumpster and get the claw out and crank it into the truck. It saves time, money, it's much more efficient, and it saves a gazillion tons of carbon emissions from the big diesel dump trucks. And it's such a simple application. So we can manage those. I mean, you don't really need to secure a dumpster, but we can manage, secure, and provide analytics. And there are some things, again, that are obvious, like you might want to monitor the battery life on them wirelessly, so you can put out reports on battery life. And another example that just came up here as I was walking through the show floor on my way in is another one that you just say, why didn't I think of that with the doorbell? So there's a vendor down there that does Internet of Things, internet-connected doorbells. So when you go up and press the doorbell, it has a little camera there at the door, so it activates the camera, the person gets online, so to speak, and it automatically rings the owner of the home on their phone, or even if they have one on a smartwatch, which they always have on them. And interestingly, then you extend that out and say, it also, which you probably hadn't thought of, is it does ring and ring their phone and identify who's ringing the doorbell if they're in Hong Kong and their doorbell is here in Las Vegas or California or something. So they can answer and through the internet intercom capabilities talk to the person and say, hey, Joe, I'm not home. And they say, what do you mean you're not home? I just rang the doorbell and you're talking to me. So it's kind of funny the way things are evolving. Federal government is doing sensors in millions of different applications. We're seeing sensors on the borders, solar-powered sensors, so they presumably never lose battery power. We're monitoring some of that. Pretty much anything that's addressable in the Internet of Things or the Internet of Everything are going to be managed in some way by an enterprise mobility management software.
Thanks for sharing those examples. I know we attended the AT&T Developer Conference earlier this week, and that was one of the solutions. One of the developers had the doorbell, but it was for the VRBO market, so those vacation and rental homes. So you know what? I'm not there, but I'll let you in so you can visually see them at the door, push the button, it opens a door for them and lets them in. And there were all other applications that would tie into that. So it was a really cool example, and it made me think of that same example. So my next question is right now, with the way the industry is going, there's a lot of co-opetition. We're competing with the same vendors that we should be partnering with. We are developing these partnership ecosystems, especially around the Internet of Things and other mobile solutions that are very specific for the industrial internet. Can you talk a little bit about your partnership strategy and some of the things that you guys are doing with your partnership? And maybe you want to apply that to some of the experiences that you have working for the federal government.
Well, in a broad sense, we had, as AirWatch, we were vastly successful as a startup as AirWatch. Our biggest problem really was growth, and that actually is a problem when you're small, and we're adding people as fast as we possibly could. But now that we're VMware, we're in a role where at AirWatch we had a couple hundred very good partners, and we're very good partners to have. We're working together with all of the carriers, with all of the big government systems integrators, and with many, many, many resellers. But I say many, 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 we had a couple hundred. Now that we're part of VMware, they've brought AirWatch in to the VMware partner ecosystem and fully embraced us. They have a full staff that's dedicated only to partner relationships and so on, and they have 75,000 partners under contract. So it's changed the world quite a bit from what we see. As far as specific things, we do things with all of the partners to customize. I get calls probably really every day from somebody that says, we've developed a new biometric capability. We would like to talk with you about seeing if it's of interest. We have an interest from a Navy command or something like that. We want to see if there's an interest from AirWatch to integrate it. So what we found with a lot of those technologies is if it's truly something that the customer base wants, then AirWatch builds it in, integrates it so that it's a single platform, and all of the AirWatch VMware technology can be run from a single administrative console, and basically you simplify the whole process. So you don't have to have third-party pieces of equipment running off of their own consoles. And then we run into so many of them. Some of them are normal, like what I said, everybody's coming up with a new piece of biometrics. I recently ran into one where we're working with a military command that now has a contract with a phone vendor that makes a cell phone that works underwater. So we're wondering what they're going to do with it underwater, because it'd be kind of hard to talk, but you can actually put it on a YouTube and put it in a fish tank and watch the YouTube through the water in the fish tank. That's what we do for demos.
Interesting. So I want to wrap this up. So of course I usually like to end it with what's on the horizon. What are we? I think I want to keep this topic to more what your perspective is, not just for VMware and AirWatch, but more of based on your experience and some of the conversations that you're having with customers today. What are some of the things that you think are going to be big for 2015? It may be big for you, but maybe big for the industry that we should really be concentrating on as we all are in the industry and focused on the important things.
I would love to be able to identify the next great thing for everybody here. And so it's a great question, Stephanie. I talk with my counterparts in the CES government conference. Whenever we have a dinner, maybe we'll have 6 or 8 of us at the table and say, with all of this IT horsepower at the table, we need to sit down here and say, what is the next great thing? And so it's hard. Some people say it's a weapon. They've come up with, like the Navy now has a laser weapon that has 100% accuracy within 2 miles and has unlimited ammunition because all it uses is the electricity that's generated by the battleship that it's on. So things like that are very cool if you're talking to somebody from the military. From a general sense, I'm repeating, but the Internet of Things is an area that we're investing very heavily in, and as you go through the show floor, you'll see that is super, super prevalent. And then in a VMware-specific scenario, or VMware in a limited amount of partners, end-user computing or desktop virtualization, and combining that or extending that all the way to the mobile endpoint is something that every large organization is currently testing and looking at deploying. So I expect all of those to be areas, but I wouldn't mind flipping the question back around to the audience, and if anyone out there has an idea that's really the coolest, next great thing, everybody loves to hear about that stuff.
Thank you. I know from our perspective, I think we're really excited for 2015 to see the wearable market really move into the enterprise. So not just wearables, but other solutions that utilize wearable devices. And I think a lot of what we hear at the Consumer Electronics Show is very consumer-oriented, but a lot of these devices will launch on the consumer side, and then we start to find real-world applications on the industrial side or in the manufacturing facilities or smart factories.
A quick application that I heard about downstairs is, Google Glass has the in your line of sight or on the edge of your line of sight, the equivalent of a 60-inch high-def monitor. And so you think of, the things you've seen on TV and whatnot, but really they drilled down there in the healthcare industry to say a surgeon currently is doing the operation, and they sort of stop to look to the wall to high-def 60-inch monitor display of the X-ray, and saying that now in healthcare, that technology is starting to be used during the actual surgery where the surgeon doesn't have to look away. I don't know if I'm stealing somebody else's idea here, but I see a few people are smiling. So I think it's very cool.
Well, we're seeing a couple of nods here because we do have Athere Labs, one of our sponsors, who's actually in that industry and probably will be doing some demos later to talk more about that. So, well, thank you, Mark, for your time today. We appreciate your comments.